And welcome back for another fun Power Hour podcast where I've got some great friends of mine with Susan and Martin, where they've written a book that's called Body of Nine that's grabbed a lot of attention, grabbed my attention for sure. And so before we dive right into your book, I think it's important for people to really know who you are, what brought you to where you are today, And Susan, I don't know which one should go first, but Susan, I'll let you take it from there.
Oh,
Tell us about yourself.
People say, where are you from? And how did you get into this work? And I've been a seeker. My first experience with knowing that I had a bigger purpose was at the age of 12.
Wow.
Sitting on the mansard roof gutter connected to the universe. And I didn't at the time know, where that voice or person or guide or whoever it was talking to me and telling me, Susan, you have to learn to own your power and use it in a way that is for the good.
Was that here in Bozeman?
No, I was in Belgium, actually.
Belgium, okay. Yeah.
I moved there when I was 10 and did my high school, all the way through high school. And that was back in the 1970s when...
I was going to say, is that about Vietnam era? Something in that area?
A little after Vietnam. Just, I guess it was. But I was 10 when we moved there.
The world was in turmoil.
It was.
It's still scarred.
Yes, very much so. Americans were still well loved in Europe when we first got there.
Right.
And then by the time I left in the late 70s, they were no longer well loved in Europe. So it was an interesting decade to go through that transition.
Interesting.
It had a profound impact on who I am today. In that I had this exposure on a very worldly level to culture and language and people, but we were also really well protected, very, very naive and very, in the international community in Europe in the 70s was very protected, yet very worldly. And that was a very interesting way to grow up, nothing like anybody in the United States was experiencing at the time. So when I came back to the States to go to college, I had a huge culture gap. Hadn't watched TV for a decade, and began to re-experience American culture and what was expected and what life was like. And I did the classic path back in the 1970s and 80s. I went to Wharton, I went to Brown University, I did worked on Wall Street. I moved to Silicon Valley. I worked in Silicon Valley for 20 years, and in every walk of life. So I've done every kind of job, from engineering management to product development to operations and finance. And so I have this really weird background.
Wow.
And I had 3 children. And one day I woke up and said, there's a Talking Heads song, "How did I get to here?"
Right.
The days go by, water flowing underground and to the blue again. This is not my beautiful life. And I had gotten myself into a really shitty situation. And
at this point now you're in California?
Yeah, I was in California, Northern California, Santa Cruz at the time, actually. And I woke up and said, wow, I'd like to be with my children. I don't want to be working a 70-hour work week and driving to Emeryville from Santa Cruz. And I had a relationship that was, I'm going to be kind, toxic at best. And I had to get myself out of that. As part of getting out of that, I started to study to be a life coach. It was all the thing in California, the California woo-woo world, which I was very much part of. And so I did all the training curriculum to be a life coach and relationship coach. And in part of this, they had what they called soul typing. And I found out what we call natural number.
Right.
And it explained all the things I loved about myself and gave me full permission to be me. And this is still something I struggle with today, even 20 years into this work. It's like, wow, getting permission to be you. And I think this is one of the most powerful pieces of this, is that from this understanding of what Body of Nine is, I have built an understanding of who I am and who other people are at a very fundamental level, which that's what's, that's been the drive. It's like, oh, we're meant to be appreciated, loved, honored, to be a gift.
Right.
Instead of being a pain in the ass, which is really how most of us treat each other.
Yeah. So from the age of 12, you're in Belgium. roughly around the early 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you transitioned to the United States roughly around what time?
78, I went to Brown.
78.
So I came back
Wow.
to the States and went to college.
And you were born and raised in Belgium?
No, I moved up and down the East Coast till I was 10. And then when I was 10, we moved to Belgium.
Got it. Yeah.
My dad worked for ITT.
So I guess to create that foundation, what were your parents like?
I think my dad was probably a spy, although he never admitted that.
Okay.
Or, well, he worked for the NSA. My mom was kind of a homemaker who got thrown into a very alone life in Europe. And she built herself this beautiful international community and kind of traipsed through this very chic life that she lived in Europe. They stayed for 20 plus years in Europe. I came back to the States after 7 and only returned for vacations in summer time.
Right. And so at that point, was there anything, I guess, attributes from your parents that kind of molded you to around the 1970s that kind of gave you this, would that be clairvoyance or what would that be?
I don't really think my parents supported that side of me until much later in my life. At that time, they're like, no, you go to Brown, you go to work, and you get the best grades you possibly can. You go be successful and go run a company.
Do the American dream.
Yeah, that was what my dad wanted for me, right? I'm not sure what my mom's ever really wanted for me, but that's a whole nother conversation, right, in life. Right. So I followed that until my mid-30s, until I woke up and said, whoa.
Was that in the 1990s?
Yes.
Right.
1990s, when my kids were born.
Got it.
They changed everything.
So you did the American dream, got your college, got your job, got your kids, got your picket fence, got a really long drive to work every day, right?
Handsome husband was supposedly healthy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so in the 1990s, what was that lightning bolt? What changed there? Was it one step? Was it like one day, or was it a gradual?
No, I woke up one day and realized that I had been raised a codependent, and that I was used to receiving affection in very broken ways. One of the things that we've learned is through our Body of 9 work is that people are attracted to natural numbers that are familiar to them. So that old adagio, marry your parents.
Right. Yes,
because you're used to receiving and giving love in very specific ways.
Right.
Based off who's loved you. And so my mother, I married a model of love that I was used to from my mother. And lo and behold, in my 40s, I discovered that was actually a very codependent model. And up to that point, I thought I was kind of normal and that things were just that way. And so I kind of woke up and said, oh, no, it doesn't have to be this way.
Right.
So what else is there? In that sense, if there's always been something else there that is available to us as humans that we're not quite getting.
Right.
And when I found this, I was like, oh, we don't get it because we don't know this.
Right. Right.
And until you know who you are physiologically, which then tells you who you are spiritually, and enables you to speak to others and understand without putting your lens over who they are.
Right.
That changes everything.
Right. What would be a good example of that, especially in today's world? How would the audience be able to relate to that?
Well, Martin and I, he's natural number 5 and I'm natural number 6. And 5s like plans. They like to think about all the eventualities and all the possibilities that could go wrong.
Right.
And they don't really want you to change the plans because they've planned out all the eventualities. And so they know it's not going to go that way, but they at least feel more comfortable. I'm a 6. 6 is about responding to the energy in the moment, what's most alive, what's most important. And so I'm changing the plans all the time.
Right.
Martin has given me grace to do that.
Yeah.
Instead of getting mad at me when I want to change the plans again, he's like, okay, give me a second. Let me replan the plan. And for me, I know that when he gets condescending, I've hurt his feelings.
Right.
And that's a huge thing. So when he's actually being mean to me in my world, I need to go back and say, oh, wait, he's not being mean. I did something.
Right.
So how do I own that piece? And owning our behaviors and how they, slide out sideways without us realizing is a big part of this as well.
Right. Right. And that's kind of the fast forwarding where you are now, right? And that's how you can kind of relate through your studies, through the book, right? And so getting more into what makes Susan Susan, sounds like there's multiple factors that make Susan. And I think of Susan as my name being Alden. It's kind of like a title. It's kind of like generic, right? It's everything you're seeing from the outside. But within a body, there's multiple facets, right? And that's almost what your book relates to, right?
Yeah.
Is breaking into those facets, each one of them.
Yes, very much so. It's funny you say, Susan is one of my names. It's my full name is Susan Bennett Fisher.
Oh, there you go.
And the Bennett and the Fisher are chosen.
Yeah.
And the Bennett is a family name, and the Fisher is Martin's name. And in choosing that name, it really is a title.
Right.
And so I never thought about it that way. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's, I kind of look at it like playing chess sometimes. I'm the third party looking in. And so, some things that I really noticed what you're talking about is you notice some gifts early on in your teen years, right? And naturally they were growing without you even knowing it.
Yes.
To a certain extent where maybe around 30 years old, the light went off, right? And almost that lightning bolt of like, wow, something's got to change. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Let's call it the matrix or the system, right? You're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. And then you're like, wait a second, it feels foreign, right?
Yeah.
Like it's almost water and oil. This isn't mixing anymore. Something's got to change. And so I appreciate you bringing that introduction here, because I know people are dying to know who you are and who Martin is. And Martin, how did you fall into this whole puzzle? I'm intrigued to know.
There's a kind of irony that Susan and I grew up between the ages of 10 and 18 within 200 miles of each other. Because I grew up in England.
Right.
Sure, people can figure out from my accent that I'm not American. And I went to school in a good school. My parents moved all the time so that I could always go to the best schools.
Right.
They spent a lot of time making sure that I was prepared for whatever it was I wanted to do. My dad was one of the first programmers.
Right.
So I learned binary when I was 9.
Wow. So what year was that?
That was 68.
68. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that when computers were bigger than this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And I was lucky enough to go to school that let me do computer science at the fundamental levels of education in Britain, O levels and A levels.
Wow.
And so I was on a flex writer typing basic programs in 1974, 75, and was lucky enough to get accepted into UMIST, which is the MIT equivalent in Manchester University, which is one of the 2 places that created computers.
Wow.
And people have often asked, well, if I wasn't doing computers, what would I do? And I've got no idea.
Right.
Because it's just so easy for me.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, that's part of my creation. Part of my natural number is the ability to see the big picture and drill into small pictures.
Your suspense is killing me, because I'm sure the audience is like, what are they talking about? What are these numbers?
Yes.
Right. And we're wanting to dive in there, but we're not diving in there yet.
We'll get there. Context. It's
there
about
you
context.
go.
So continuing on the context, I graduated in 1980, and in 1981, I saw an advert in the local newspaper. Did I want to go and work doing this in Silicon Valley?
Right.
And as a computer programmer, Silicon Valley is the holy grail. Everybody in Silicon Valley is a programming god, in theory. And so about 200 people applied in the UK to go out to the US, and 3 of us went out to the US in 1981. Worked together. And I spent the rest of my career in Silicon Valley. I was the 300th employee at Oracle. I was the 100th employee at Yahoo. I was the first manager they hired into engineering there.
Wow.
But before I went to Yahoo, Susan and I met at a company that I was doing consulting with, and she'd just joined full time.
What year was that, roughly?
This was 92, 93.
Got it.
So
had you had your eyes opened yet, or you're in that transitional phase?
No, I met Martin 2 weeks after I married my second husband.
Oh, interesting.
So we became friends. We would play bridge together and go out to lunch, and we liked each other.
We liked each other, yeah.
And there was an undercurrent, but I had just gotten married, and he was dealing with some
other stuff,
things. And so we were just good friends for a couple of years, and I had my kids.
Right.
Then we lost touch for 9 years.
Yeah. We both had a lot of growing to do. I was the 100th employee at Yahoo, and that was an interesting few years.
Right.
96 to 2000 was a crazy time. If you go back and look at what was happening in the computer science industry and the internet, it was just a rocket ship. Straight up. And I was happy just doing that. Mm-hmm. But part of me was always thinking, there's got to be more. Someone came to me once and said, can I use this particular product to run a nuclear power station? And I'm like, well, no, but that wasn't sufficient to know that I could sit down and write code and be pretty good at it and be a good manager. Wasn't fulfilling.
Right.
I'd always had a dream of being a pilot, so I left Yahoo in 2000 and did 3 years of professional flying, and then went back into computer science and computers and worked at various places. But it wasn't until Susan and I got back together, when she was open and available and I was becoming available in 2008, that I started to find a path towards being able to change the world.
Wow.
And just as Susan said, when I was about 12, I was walking through my grandparents' backyard and had an idea that there was something bigger that I could do. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've always been is incredibly skeptical.
Right.
And so for everyone that's listening to this, skepticism is not a bad thing. And even be skepticism about what we're talking about, I think will make the case that what we're talking about is very real. But when I first met it in 2008, I was like, this can't be real. It doesn't make any sense. But the more I dug into it, the more it became not only real, but it was an important part of what I could do. Mm. And so Susan and I would been hanging out together. We met a bunch of people that had been to Burning Man many, many times. And they invited us in 2012. And I got brave enough to say, yeah, okay. Because it's a brave thing to go to Burning Man.
It's a very brave thing.
Especially this last year, it got flooded out.
Indeed. Yeah.
Right. They're helicoptering food in.
Indeed.
And stuff.
Yeah. So, but when I was in Burning Man, one of the things that I realized was I could be anybody I wanted.
Right.
Because that's the gift of Burning Man. You can be whoever you want when you go to Burning Man. And when I left Burning Man, I realized that who I wanted to be was me. Mm. Which is an incredible gift.
Did you know who you were yet at that time?
Not until I left.
Ooh, the suspense is killing me.
Because Burning Man is about self-reliance. It's about love. It's about understanding. It's about giving people the grace to be themselves. And it's a place where you can explore your spirituality. Mm. And there was a whole history of spiritual dimension that I'd been reading about since I could read. I am a voracious reader. And I'd be reading books about magic and spirituality and the past and the aliens and all the things that you go back in time. Why 60 for the number of minutes in an hour? Everything that you can look at. Ooh. Going back to the Matrix questions.
Right.
How do we get here as humanity? Right. Is it true that we're smarter than all the people that came before us? Now, heck no. There's no way that we're smarter.
Right.
But there's all these things, all this knowledge that got lost or can come back up again. And various things happened at Burning Man, completely sober, that led me to realize that my past has been setting me up for this ability. And then when Susan started identifying people, I realized that I can do my job as a protector, because part of my role is to protect the work and protect Susan.
But you didn't necessarily know at that time when you were transitioning, right?
No, this was all stuff that came to me. It's like I realized I had a purpose. I found a purpose that was not just writing code.
Right.
And
how many people are you talking to right now in the audience that are thinking the same thing through all of your knowledge?
I suspect
really everybody,
but there's probably, I'm going to make up a number, 15% of people in your audience right this second that are thinking, what's next?
Right. They're sitting in their cubicle.
Yeah.
They're going,
yeah. And it's like, okay, yes, keep doing what you're doing, but expand. What are you really here for?
Right.
And we know part of my gift as a natural number 5, and we will get into what that means, is the ability to put stuff and ideas together, put them in a framework, reference that framework.
Okay.
And I believe that the internet was built by natural number 5s because I can go in and find anything anywhere on the internet, and most other people just don't know how.
Right.
Because I just think the way that the people that wrote the search engines do. I mean, I was at Yahoo. and
writing search engines.
Writing search engines. Excuse me. So, but the magic for me was not learning how to be a great programmer or a great manager. It's about how do we get people back into their esoteric self,
Right.
because the past is full of hints. We'll cover some of them that you can dig into. Some of the things that we discovered, you can dig out books written in the 15th, 14th century that point to the same stuff.
Right.
And it's like everything that we're going to be talking about today, we didn't make up.
Right.
8,000 people we listened to. 8,000 people, Susan. This is a fact and truth of our reality. Going back to the Matrix conversation.
Oh, it's going back into reality as itself.
Yeah, because it's the past. There's a huge amount of wisdom in the past that disappeared. This is just one of.
Well, before we go that far,
oh yeah,
we're going to just kind of put the cherry on top of the intro. So now, before we dig deeper, I want to connect these dots. I got two open dots here.
Right.
I got an amazing woman and an amazing man. I got an amazing woman that's doing everything that she's designed to do. And I got this amazing man that's working for corporate 500, Yahoo. You were part of the search end before Google even ever came about.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Right. And so now we got this triangle, these two sides that are finally coming together. You guys are, imagine you're just playing cards. You said you used to play bridge and stuff like that, and then talk about, hey, I can only imagine what your conversations were. So what do you think this Matrix is about? Or this coding thing on Yahoo? You're like, oh, this corporate 500 job.
Well,
you know,
we were just flirting with each other.
I'm just flirting. All right.
Well,
all right.
How we got together again,
Right.
because we met, as you said, we said 93. 2008, my parents' 50th wedding anniversary.
Got it.
I'm in England,
Mm-hmm.
and I went out to the pub. That's what you do in England. At 6 o'clock in the evening, 3 o'clock in the morning, still with the same guy, still chatting about stuff in general. And I got this urge because part of.
Were you an airplane pilot at this time?
No.
Yahoo, or what were you doing?
It was Yahoo then flying, and this was, I was working at a company called Medical, running their IT department. Software.
Got it.
But
so you're kind of floating now. You don't really know what your next step
absolutely
is.
true.
Got it.
Yes.
She's over here like, I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah. And so I got this message, instinct, if you will, voice that said, you should call your friend Sue, not this Susan, another friend of ours. And so I sent Sue a text message because I'm in England, and it's whatever time I expected Sue would get back to me in a couple of days. And I said, hi, Sue, how are you doing? And she wrote back within 15 seconds, said, not so great. I've got this disease. I've got to have a major operation. And so instead of flying back directly to where I was going, I stopped by to see Sue. And Sue had to have an operation. And part of the team that was looking after Sue
was me.
Was slated.
Wow.
Sue and Martin and I had worked together at Gain Technology in Palo Alto 9 years before. That's how we all met too. And Sue and I had stayed friends, both lived in Santa Cruz. And we were both Martin and I were intrigued to know that we were connecting again. And it took another 6 months after Sue was better. And Sue said, Martin called Sue up and said, let's celebrate.
And who's Sue again?
Sue is a mutual friend.
Mutual friend,
right, that we worked with.
Yep.
And when she was better, Martin said, let's go out. And Sue said, okay, let me call Susan and bring her along. And he's like, okay, whatever. And my daughter dressed me up really good that night. She said, you're not wearing that, and put a different dress on me and made me look really pretty.
And we've been together ever since.
I'm watching a movie in my head, by the way, if you see me daydreaming over here, because now I'm watching like Romeo and Juliet and getting all primed up and ready to go.
Yeah, Romeo and Juliet without the death part. But yes.
Right.
Well, not until this year. So, yes. And we just connected that night, and we pulled up to my door. When I got home, Sue was driving me home, and Martin calls Sue and asks for my number while I'm still sitting in the car.
Right.
And we had some decisions to make because he wasn't sure what he wanted to do and who he wanted to be. And it was very, very brave to choose me.
Right. Right.
He had a safe relationship that he was in the process of leaving. And he chose me and my 3 daughters, which, they were 10, 12, and 14-ish at that time. And we were the girls. Right. So it was very brave of him to step into that kind of a world. And also, I had a huge passion around this work. And my mother took me aside and said, you really need to look better and stop talking about your work.
Right. And if you broke down what work is to the audience, what would that be at that time? This is 2008, roughly, right?
Yeah.
And that's the economic kind of crash.
Yes.
It was kind of a whirlwind at that point.
Yes. Several years before, I had pretty much lost everything. And Martin had gone through a similar experience of almost losing everything. And so when we got back together, we came together with almost nothing.
Wow.
Financially and emotionally. I mean, it was a real restart for both of us. But I had understood my natural number.
Right.
And I had been at that point studying and learning everything I could about the original observation and discovery that was made by this couple in California. And I was pretty committed to it.
Yeah.
And that was all I would talk about and all I would do.
And I'd spent the better part of a year digging into, did I want to become a born-again Christian? Because there was clearly something spiritual in my life that was missing. And I was living in the Central Valley of California at the time, which is one of the most churches per head, certainly in California. And so I went to a few churches and realized that didn't feel good for me.
Got it.
And I've actually, with all respect to everyone that is religious in the audience, I've never actually been in a church where I felt better when I left. So it's fine. But now I consider, we both consider ourselves very spiritual.
Right.
But that was part of the path that I had to go through in terms of, is this the path for me?
That opens up a conversation. Is religion spiritual and vice versa? And that might enter into the next episode.
I think that's a personal choice for people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It is clear to me that there I'm going with our higher powers. And that will be part of the more esoteric conversation that we have as we go down this work, because as well as the physical, the body-based side of it, there is a very strong esoteric component and a very strong numerological component.
Right.
So we'll get to that.
Yeah. And so I could sum up this kind of introduction that we're doing right now. 2008. And you don't know what your next step is.
Nope.
Right? And you had let's not call it a posh life, but you had things organized where you almost just gave up everything. You moved to be with this wonderful lady in California. At this time, it was a whirlwind. Economically, physically, spiritually, for everyone involved, including California as a whole, as the United States as a whole. 2008 collapse. And so at this point, do you guys tie the knot and say, this is what we're going to do? Or you don't even know what to do at this point?
We tied the knot.
We got engaged in 2 weeks.
Yes, because we'd known each other. We surprised the heck out of the kids.
Yeah, they were confused as
And you were divorced at that time?
Yeah, I was 7 years divorced. I'd been a single mom for 7 years with my 3 kids.
And then you just sent a text to your ex and just said, hey,
it's not
working out.
Just after my divorce became final, yes.
Yeah.
And so it was, yes, to some extent.
6 months.
It took about 6 months to get that all sorted out, but it was.
We had a week of touch and go.
Yeah.
Wow.
But from 2009, when we got married, to 2012, where we actually really kickstarted this and our research in Burning Man, it was just being together and getting to know each other. And it takes that long to become part of a blended family.
So I want to build this up to the Burning Man concept. It sounds like that was almost a changing point.
Oh, for sure.
Was that 2012?
2012, yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to bring it up to 2012. In our next one, we're going to dive deep into esotericism, where Burning Man, some true origin of meanings, right?
Yep.
Even before we dig into the book, because everything led up to 2012. And then after 2012 led you on this next journey that's going to lead into the book, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, this is Alden Antonucci. This is Susan and Martin. Stay tuned for part 2 into esotericism of Body of 9. Stay tuned for the next.